Well, look who's back with yet another tech announcement that's supposed to change our lives forever. NVIDIA just dropped the so-called ultimate desktop IPC. Sounds impressive, right? Or maybe just another shiny box of overhyped nonsense that'll end up collecting dust next to my old toadstools. I can already hear the tech enthusiasts squealing like they've just found the holy grail of computing. But let's be real. How many times have we heard this before? It's like every year someone promises me the best thing since sliced bread, and all I get is a stale loaf. So grab your popcorn, or whatever it is you kids eat these days, because we're about to dive into this announcement and see if it's really worth the hype or just another fancy paperweight. And hey, if you enjoy watching me roast the internet, do the usual. Like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment about how I am the grumpiest old man you've ever seen. Let's get the circus started.
There it is. We've been waiting for this one.
And this is fun. 1 petaflops.
Tiny little desktop computer, maybe a little bigger than this. Essentially a mini PC, but it's got some serious power. Now that the specs are out, it's not what I expected. However, the DGX Station.
So we've got a mini PC that's apparently packing some serious power. I mean, it's cute and all, but when did we start measuring computing power in petaflops? Sounds like something you'd find in a sci-fi movie, not in my blog. And let's be honest, if it's not going to help me catch more flies or keep my swamp cozy, what's the point? I'm just waiting for the moment they start selling these things with a side of overpriced accessories.
Station.
This is what a PC should look like.
This thing right here, that's a whole different story. This might be what changes the game for people trying to do machine learning, data science, and LLMs in their office, locally. Let's take a look at the specs of the DGX Spark, which was formerly known as NVIDIA Digits project, and the newly announced DGX Station. Now, if you know about LLMs, running them locally, and what's required out of your hardware, or you've been watching this channel for any amount of time at this point, then you know that memory bandwidth is key. Not only memory bandwidth, but the size of the memory also. Those are very key elements to having things run quickly. And you want your LLMs to run fast, output tokens per second as quickly as possible. You know, things like the 4090 and the 5090, which I got down there, these output tokens extremely fast. However, the problem with these is the lack of memory. They have plenty of memory bandwidth, very fast. The RTX 4070.
The classic tale of speed versus memory. It's like having a race car with a tiny gas tank. Sure, it can zoom, but good luck getting anywhere meaningful. The RTX 4070 might be fast, but if it's running out of memory faster than I can croak, what's the point? It's like trying to catch flies with a net full of holes. You can have all the bandwidth in the world, but if you can't hold on to anything, you're just spinning your wheels.
70, which is last generation, and it's not even the highest end card. It's not even the 4080 or the 4090, and that one has a memory bandwidth of 504 gigabytes per second. The M4 Max from Apple has about that same memory bandwidth. Now the M3 Ultra has the highest memory bandwidth from Apple right now. I'm doing separate reviews on that one and a cluster of these things, but that one comes in at 819 gigabytes per second. And if we take a look at this chart again, and the newest line of RTX machines from NVIDIA, RTX 5070 is lower than that. RTX 5070 Ti is higher than that, 896. And then we go from there up to RTX 5090 at 1700 gigabytes per second. That's crazy. Really good memory bandwidth there. But then the limitation is right there, 32 gigabytes of memory, VRAM, which is the memory available for the GPU to do the processing. If you go bigger than that with your models, if your LLMs need to take up more.
Here we go with the classic GPU memory conundrum. You can have all the bandwidth in the world, but if your VRAM is capped at 32 gigabytes, you might as well be trying to fit a hippo into a toadstool. It's like having a fancy sports car that can't carry any passengers. If your models are too big, you're just going to hit a wall. It's frustrating, really. You'd think with all this tech wizardry, they'd figure out how to give us a little more room to breathe.
To take up more space in memory than what's available, you're going to spill over to the CPU, and then things just slow down drastically and become unusable. But of course, if we want to use LLMs that are going to give us better results, generate better content, then we want to use larger LLMs. And that's where the Mac Studio with 512 gigs of available memory really wins here. Now, if you go with the M4 Max Mac Studio or MacBook Pro, then that goes up to 128. Less memory bandwidth, bandwidth, but a lot more memory, still really good. So what does Digits give us, or DGX Spark? Let's take a look at that. Very nice specs. We do have 128 gigabytes of that memory, and it says here unified system memory, just like Apple Silicon. So that means that this is going to be not upgradable, obviously. It's LPDDR5X, just like the Apple memory, and it's going to be unified, so it's available for both the CPU and the GPU. That's good.
Unified memory, huh? That's a nice touch. Like finally finding a decent lily pad to rest on after hopping around all day. It means the CPU and GPU can share resources, which should help with performance. But let's not get too excited. It's still not upgradable. So if you're stuck with 128 gigabytes, you better hope it's enough for whatever fancy models you're trying to run. Otherwise, you'll be back to the drawing board, or worse, the CPU.
It's good. But wait a minute. And these machines, by the way, are $4,000. These little DGX ones from NVIDIA. Now, they are providing these boards to
$4,000 for a mini PC. That's more than I'd spend on a whole swamp full of toadstools. I get it. They're trying to sell us on the latest tech. But at that price, it better come with a personal assistant and a lifetime supply of flies. It's like they think just slapping AI on a product automatically justifies the price tag. I can already hear the wallets crying.
To partners to create their own little mini PCs. The only one that's available for pre-order now is this one from Asus. It's called the Asus Ascent GX10. Really curious about that one. It's $1,000 cheaper, but still really expensive. $3,000 for that one, $4,000 for the DGX Spark.
$3,000 still feels like a hefty toll for a mini PC. It's like they're trying to charge us for the privilege of using their fancy tech. At this rate, I might as well start a crowdfunding campaign just to afford one. It's absurd how they think slapping a high price on something makes it more valuable. I'd rather stick to my trusty old swamp setup than shell out that kind of cash for a glorified box.
Spark, and then you can get a bundle also right now with a connecting cable. That cable, the connection between the machines and how you cluster them is also going to be important because that's going to be a bottleneck. And we're going to take a look at that momentarily. But look at this memory bandwidth, 273 gigabytes per second for the Spark. That's the same memory bandwidth as the M4 Pro, not even the M4 Max from Apple. I think that's going to be pretty usable, but it's not going to be amazing. And $4,000? I think they're charging that much money because it's an AI machine.
The classic "it's an AI machine" excuse for a sky-high price tag. They think just slapping that label on it makes it worth its weight in gold. Newsflash, it doesn't. If it's not delivering groundbreaking results, it's just another overpriced gadget. At this point, I'd expect it to brew my morning coffee and tell me jokes for that kind of cash. Otherwise, it's just a fancy box that'll end up gathering dust next to my old toadstools.
And it's from NVIDIA. Is it going to run your LLMs pretty well? I think so, because of the size of that memory, especially if you link those two machines together, two or more. They don't explain too much about how many of them you can link together at a time. We'll have to see. I did pre-order one, so we'll check it out. Here's another less than impressive little tidbit. Tensor performance here.
Tensor performance sounds fancy, but what does it really mean? 8,000 ITOPs. That's like saying my croaky voice can hit a high note. It sounds impressive until you realize it's just a lot of noise if it doesn't translate into real-world results. It's just another buzzword to throw around. I'm still waiting for something that will actually make my life easier, not just fill my head with jargon.
Performance here is Station. What is this thing? It looks like a motherboard and a CPU and a GPU all together into a desktop.
Now we're getting to the meat of it. This thing looks like it's trying to be the Swiss Army knife of computing. Motherboard, CPU, GPU, all crammed into one box. It's like they took a whole lab and shoved it into a desktop. But let's be real. It better deliver on those petaflops, or it's just a fancy paperweight. If it's not going to revolutionize my swamp life, I'm not sure what the fuss is about.
Desktop size machine, but this is completely different because this machine is designed to do AI and that's it. It's going to be really freaking good at it. How much it's going to cost? We don't know yet, and it's not available for pre-order yet. And OEM partners like Asus and Dell are supposed to have machines that will have this board in it. Now let's take a look at the specs of the Station. This is a whole different story. First of all, you got the Blackwell Ultra GPU now. Look at that GPU memory, up to 288 gigabytes of memory and 8 terabytes per second.
Now we're talking a GPU with 288 gigabytes of memory and 8 terabits per second. That's the kind of power that could make even my croaky voice sound impressive. If this machine can actually harness that kind of memory and speed, it might just be worth the hype and the price tag. But let's see if it can deliver on those promises. Otherwise, it's just another overhyped gadget that will end up in the back of the swamp.
And bandwidth, oh my goodness, that is crazy. CPU memory, also pretty good, 496 gigabytes. And look at that.
Now we're really diving into the specs. Nearly 500 gigabytes of CPU memory. That's enough to make a toad like me green with envy. And 900 gigabytes per second for webui. If this thing can actually handle that kind of throughput, it could be a game changer for AI tasks. But let's not get too carried away. We've seen impressive numbers before that didn't translate into real-world performance. If it can live up to the hype though, it might just be worth every penny.
And look at that memory bandwidth for the CPU, 396 gigabytes per second. This machine is just geared for AI. Do you remember when I said the bottleneck is not going to be necessarily what's inside the machine, but how you connect multiple machines together to grow into a cluster? NVLink, that's the technology that allows you to link multiple GPUs together, multiple boards in this case, up to 900 gigabytes per second, which is pretty decent. But now we're showing a slowdown. It's no longer that 8 terabyte value, right? Now we're down to the sub-terabyte area. That's where Apple lives right now with their consumer devices. By the way, the station is more of an enterprise level device. But I don't see why people that are professionals, people that are making money doing AI stuff, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to buy one. We'll see. I don't know. And then you have something called networking bandwidth, and they created this new thing called NVIDIA Connects, which is a super NIC. From what I understood, it's going to be an optical-based network connection, and that's going to be way faster than your regular 10 gigabit or 25 gigabit connection. Here you got up to 800 gigabit per second, not gigabytes, gigabit. So much smaller than NVLink bandwidth, but still much faster than regular Ethernet connections that we typically have, even the ones that we typically don't have, like up to 25 gigabits. This is 800, so it's still much faster. Now, since the Spark is costing $4,000, which is probably $1,000 more than we all expected, since it was
$4,000 for the Spark. That's a hefty price tag, especially if it's more than we expected. It's like they're trying to see just how much they can squeeze out of us for the latest tech. If it doesn't deliver some serious performance, we're all going to feel a bit cheated. I mean, it better come with a complimentary toad or something for that price.
Since it was announced at CES. How much do you think the NVIDIA DGX station is going to cost? I don't know, but it's probably going to be pretty expensive. We're talking about 20 petaflops here. Yeah. Now, during the keynote, he did mention something which is a little different. So normally you would quantize something to floating point 32, not quantized, I mean, a floating point 16, your LLMs, okay? I talk about quantization in other videos here. And you would take those models and you quantize them down so they run on smaller hardware to 8-bit or 4-bit. Well, these petaflop measurements that Jensen Huang was talking about, he said it was going to be 4, floating point 4. Haven't heard that one before, but it doesn't sound like it's the full 16 or 32. Not sure how that's going to play into how performant these models are going to be in that level of quantization, considering it's 4 floating point versus int4 quantization. We'll see. I think you may be able to go to NVIDIA's development center and play around with their models. I haven't done that yet, but I may have to play around with that. If you did that and you know about how they handle floating point 4, please leave a comment. I'm sure people will appreciate that. Thank you very much. Then there's this thing called RTX Pro Workstation. Really interesting little thing in the middle.
Now we're getting into the RTX Pro Workstation. Looks like it's trying to carve out its own niche in this tech jungle. With all these options, it's like a buffet of overpriced gadgets. But what's the real difference if it's just a smaller version of the big boys? It better have some tricks up its sleeve. Otherwise, it's just another shiny box that'll end up collecting dust next to my old toadstools.
Thing in the middle that sits between.
Well, we made it through that tech circus together, didn't we? Morty here, still gripping my swamp cane, as I watch the so-called ultimate desktop IPC from NVIDIA roll in with all the fanfare of a wet leaf. Who knew a mini PC could stir up such excitement? I'm still trying to figure out why folks get so hyped over petaflops. Sounds more like a bad cooking show than a computing term to me. Did it live up to my expectations? Well, let's just say if I had $1 for every tech reveal promising to change my life, I could buy one of those boxes for my bog and still have enough left over for a lifetime supply of flies. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Instead, I felt like I was being sold a glorified paperweight with a price tag that could make a toad weep. $4,000 for a mini PC. It better come with a complimentary side of magic fairies and a personal assistant to fetch me more flies. I did reluctantly nod at some specs. 288 gigabytes of GPU memory. That kind of power could make my croaky voice sound like a symphony, but only if it can actually deliver. We've seen impressive numbers before, and I'm still sitting here waiting for a real-world result rather than just flashy talk. So, if you enjoyed my grumpy rant about this overpriced tech shenanigan, do yourself a favor, like the video, subscribe for more of my delightful ramblings, and drop a comment below telling me just how grumpy I really am. Maybe we can start a support group for folks who are tired of overhyped nonsense. Until next time, remember, just because it's shiny doesn't mean it's worth your hard-earned cash, and if it doesn't make my life easier, it can hop back to where it came from.